This is TWiT.
10th anniversary of Apple Pay. I can't believe it's been 10 years.
I know, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I looked up, I found my article from when I first wrote about this on Six Colors, which was right after I started the website, because the website's a little over 10 years old now. And it was an iPhone 6 that I used to pay, because the Apple Watch was announced, but not out yet. And it honestly, the moment the Apple Watch came out, I started just using the Apple Watch for Apple Pay. That's what I used. But in that moment, right there, that was the way you used Apple Pay, was an iPhone 6. And I wrote a little piece about buying some peanut butter at Whole Foods. And
I remember that.
And having the clerk be like,
"What are you doing? It's magic."
Yeah, and he was really surprised by it. So yeah, 10 years they've been doing this, and I try to explain this to people outside the US who had a lot of sophisticated payment technology way before the US did, for a lot of different reasons, that Apple's entry into this with Apple Pay really did finally give it the kickstart it needed to get contactless payments to be a thing in the US.
Yes.
And it's a huge thing, because obviously the rest of the world's like, well, big deal. We had it before. And this is what I'm telling you is, why didn't we have it? And the answer is lots of reasons, but like nobody had been able to get it over the hump, including Google trying it. And then Apple did it, and it was, for whatever reason, just enough of a kick that now almost everybody has.
Well, and then COVID hit, and it went from being something that a lot of people use to something that everyone uses. Now it's to a point where I go to the farmer's market and someone wants cash. I'm like, that's pretty gross.
Most of the farmers market people, at my farmer's market here, they and COVID was the motivator there. They all just invested in little square terminals. Yeah, and they don't even want your cash anymore.
Well, the funny thing is that like Vallejo is all Square or something, some kind of Apple Pay. San Rafael, like 90% cash.
Interesting.
And you're just like,
it's a cultural thing.
Well, so I just started mapping all the booths. Of course, that's what I do. Is I built a map on my phone of all the booths and which ones take Apple Pay. I'm like, well, I'll just buy everything from those ones. So but I think that it is amazing how quickly. I think during COVID, we really saw it go from probably a large percentage of people using it to everyone using it, because you just don't want to touch the game.
Well, I would say, COVID was 6 years in, but to Apple Pay, or 5 plus. But what happened was, by laying that groundwork, by putting the infrastructure in place, when it came time that the pandemic happened, people were motivated to use it, and it was there and it was available. And there's so many. There's so many reasons. I don't want to hand wave it, but people are like, "Oh, you Americans, you're so behind." But like, the United States is so huge, and because of that, it's so spread out. There are so many individual places where you can buy things, and it means that there is this enormous infrastructure of technology that's used to receive payments, and to turn it over, to wave a wand and just say, oh, get new ones. Easier said than done in the United States, especially where you've got 50 different states with different laws. And like I said, geographically so dispersed. But we were it was a moment, and like Apple picked a really good moment for it. And they managed to, over the course of a few years, get everybody to kind of like upgrade their hardware and light up those terminals, to the point where 10 years later, there are reports just in the last month about how like Home Depot is starting to finally replace their terminals. Because this is what it takes, is you invest in a whole big point of sale terminal for your giant chain of stores at Home Depot, and it doesn't do Apple Pay. And then people say, oh, you should support Apple Pay. And Home Depot's like, we can't. We just spent millions of dollars. So now apparently they're starting to roll that out, and a bunch of other stores are starting to roll it out. So it's still, even 10 years later, some of them are still coming along, but Apple gave it the push that started it. It really deserves the credit for making it happen.
I have to admit, it's so unusual, and I don't particularly like using the cards. I don't like dealing with anything else. And so I realized that I used to go to Home Depot all the time, and now I mostly find Ace Hardware and other things. I go to Home Depot when I absolutely can't find something. And I realized I had to look back. I was like, because I used to go to Home Depot all the time. I was like treasure land, of things that adults can build and do. And I realized that every time I got to the cashier, I was like, really? really? And then I figure out where because a lot of times I'm not carrying my credit cards with me anymore. Like I just have my phone and my watch. And so when I go there, I go, oh, I got to go back to the car. I got to go figure out what happened to where I put those things. And then I'm just like, and when I get into the car after being at Home Depot, I'm always like, I'm never coming here again. And eventually I come back because I need something I can only get at Home Depot. And, but it is funny that I realize that I seem to never have my cards with me anymore because I don't need them, and that's the thing that's happened.
Yeah, I mean, I'm at the library again, but they have a wonderful. They don't. My library doesn't do like an annual or like a quarterly book sale. They have just a section of like books for sale, and the number of times where it's like, oh, I don't have $1 with me. I don't even have $1 in change with me. And now there are times I have to actually like buy, like if I'm buying a soda on the way to the library, I will pay in cash just to make sure I will have singles to pay. But the biggest sign of Apple's victory here is that, at least in the United States, they have managed to band-aid the technology, where like I've had to learn to stop saying, hey, do you do pay by phone? Because they'll say, oh, you mean Apple Pay? Like, well, okay, I don't want to say this is an Android phone and it uses an NFC standard that is interoperable between banks and pay. I was like, yeah, Apple Pay. Oh yes, absolutely.
So actually, that's historically, it really wasn't Apple that made this happen. Apple's timing was very good because MasterCard and Visa had agreed to introduce EMV to the U.S., a standard that had been used worldwide that year. And so what that meant was that merchants were going to have to upgrade their terminals to support EMV, which sometimes you call it chip and pin. But the idea that you could use a chip. So Apple's release of Apple Pay was timed so that when Apple Pay came out, these merchants were going to upgrade. The hope was merchants would say, well, we might as well upgrade it with touch to pay. And the merchants that didn't, like Home Depot and was it Walgreens? I can't remember the drugstore that wouldn't do it, didn't want to do it because they didn't, and this is, I think, in the long run, the key to why Apple Pay succeeded. They didn't get information about the customer. They just got an EMV token. And so these merchants like Home Depot, it wasn't merely that, oh, we don't want to do the technology, because they had to do EMV. They just didn't do Apple Pay because they wanted to keep the info about the customer.
So it's a little more complicated than that, but you're right. Apple's timing is part of it. I think it's a combination. There was an attempt in, I think, 2012 to do this. Or maybe it was actually
in 2012. MasterCard and Visa agreed that by October 1st, 2015.
Right. So in this era, they were trying to do it. I, at one point in I think 2013, got a card with a chip in it, and then in 2014 they took it away because they're like, don't forget it. In 2014 they did a pilot where during the World Series you could buy, like, I bought a hot dog using tap to pay, right? So that was a new thing that they did. Google had been trying it and couldn't get it. So it's this, I really want to say this, that I think it's a combination of, if Apple tried to do this and there was no technology, obviously it wouldn't work. But we've also seen this try to be pushed into society, and it spun its wheels and it didn't work. Well, and what happened is Apple.
It was a coincidence. It was a coinciding event, right?
It's two things, right? They had
both things happened,
and they had to both be there. There need to be enough tap to pay terminals available in the world for there to be some.
Apple, I don't think, could have unilaterally done EMV.
But what the secret sauce that I believe Apple brought to the equation is it created demand by making a big deal of Apple Pay on the iPhone, and it made people want to see. And I have, in that story about my first Apple Pay experience, there's a big sign that says now accepting Apple Pay at every single Whole Foods terminal. And so what they did was they used their brand and they created consumer demand, which what it did was they could take advantage of the places where that technology had been installed, and they could shame and push the companies that were dragging their feet on it to get on board. And that, I think, is where Apple pushed this thing over the edge, is that it had enough loyal users who wanted to use the whizzy thing from Apple that they were able to show interest and push and get it in there.
Yeah, and I mean, MasterCard and Visa had a lot of impact on this. Right. And they started, remember, shipping out cards with chips in them at that time and all of that. But I think, and there was also, by the way, one of the reasons MasterCard and Visa wanted it is because security was so terrible on the swipe and sign that they were losing a lot of money every year to fraud. So they wanted something more secure.
And I think
it was a confluence, when it's an idea whose time had come. Let's say that.
I mean, a lot of times, you look at bands and, that happened because all the right people showed up and at the right time and with the right people were interested in grunge, and you end up with Nirvana, but there's 100 places where that didn't happen and the band was really good and never went anywhere.
Right.
And I think in the
timing's everything.
The timing was there. I do think that Apple benefited from people, Mac users or Apple users tending to be a little militant about their stuff and go, because I remember talking on the show about the fact that I just moved to Pittsburgh and there was like a CVS down the street and I went down there and I bought I bought something with Apple Pay and I came back and I was like, I'm just not going to shop anywhere more than once that doesn't have Apple Pay, and I,
here's our show from October 2014. MacBreak Weekly.
Probably me talking about that.
We sent Jeff Needles out
to use Apple Pay.
to use Apple Pay
because that is the
at a Whole Foods, and there it is. There's the little Apple Pay logo. I will be fair. I at the time was very skeptical. I said, "Why is that more convenient than just taking a credit card out of your wallet?" I did not kind of buy into the notion that this was much more convenient. What I missed was the watch, because the watch hadn't come out yet, which does make it, because it's on your wrist already. I mean, you did have to take the phone out of your pocket to make that work. I don't know if I've used the phone for Apple Pay more than a handful of times. I also missed customers' desire for privacy and security.
Yeah.
And I think that people really, it took them a little while, it took them a few years, but eventually realized this is much more secure and much more
doesn't give you
you don't have to worry about card skimmers wherever you go. That's a big win for me.
Exactly.
And it's not just that. When I pass, it took me a little while to realize this, but it was not passing my debit card to the vendor. It's taking it's taking my money and then giving a new number to the
By the way,
and so it
in
was
Europe, restaurants never take your credit card. You swipe it at the table. Right. That is slowly becoming
That is starting to happen here,
just
though,
a little
now,
bit in
right?
the U.S.
I that happens to me more. I'm surprised how often that's happening now, because finally they have those handheld terminals that have tap to pay, and they come out with it now, and it's getting there. But again, this is why I think it's a big deal that it's 10 years of Apple Pay, just because everything just moves so slowly in the US. And again, yes, part of it is because our financial system is very conservative and moves very slowly. But part of it is you can't just wave the magic wand and say, let's just upgrade all the terminals, because you're talking about a number that is, it's more than the terminals in all of Europe, right? Let alone one.
Well, that's why I'm
country.
saying that decision was critical to the success of Apple Pay, because otherwise those terminals wouldn't have been prevalent. And by the way, look how long it took before you could use your watch to pay for the Tokyo subway or the New York City subway.
Right, because it's an infrastructure upgrade. They have to upgrade the turnstiles.
It's so amazing.
Exactly.
To walk up to a turnstile, you don't need a token. You don't need a clipper card. You just tap your watch.
The funny thing,
my mind was blown. That was incredible.
On the other side of that, when you see like how you don't get traction, is I was in the I'm trying to think of which airport I was in. It was the DC, I think DC airport, the IAD, I think. Anyway, Amazon has these. You just walk in, right? Yeah. You just walk into the store and you can walk out. You don't have to check in, check out.
Facing those out, by the way. The
funny thing is that there were like 4 of them that I walked past, and all of them are empty because they have a turnstile, and you have to give them your credit card before you walk in,
or your handprint,
or whatever. And both of those, and I even tried my card and it wouldn't take it. And I was like, well, I'm going to go buy it. And the funny thing, but this gets into like Amazon doesn't have that kind of.
You can move too fast.
I admit that if that was an Apple store, I probably would have gone through a couple more bumps before I decided I wasn't. But as soon as I actually tried to use a card and it wouldn't take it, I was like, oh, this is stupid. I'm not going to go somewhere else. And I never considered going back. And no one else did either, because these stores are all empty. They're sitting at the airport and all the other stores are, busy, and these were just completely empty. So it was I think that it does come down to the brand oftentimes being able to push that forward. And I also think that, and I don't know what the difference was between Android, but I think one of the things Apple tends to do better is that subtle interface thing, subtle ways that it works and bounces and is easy and doesn't have friction. It's very easy to go, oh, this has too much friction, and almost immediately stop using it. And I think Apple users are probably more sensitive to that than others. But I do think that is another factor. Apple tends to do that better than almost everybody else.